What if I told you the most explosive attack on the royal family didn't come from a Netflix drama, a scandalous memoir, or a surprise Oprah interview, but from a box of cookies? Sounds sweet, right? Until you dig deeper and realize the sugar-coated branding of Meghan Markle's new documentary project might be hiding something far more bitter. And what if I told you Prince Harry is right there with her again? This time not as a disgruntled royal stepping away from duties, but as a man allegedly willing to trade royal secrets for prime-time American relevance? Because that's exactly what's unfolding now. The project is called Cookie Queens, a coming-of-age documentary tied to the Girl Scouts of America, sugar, smiles, and sisterhood. But behind the wholesome pitch lies something far more calculated. Royal insiders are calling it the couple's boldest move yet. A stealth missile dressed up in thin mints and nostalgia. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And Prince William? He's done playing nice. Because this time, it's not just about reputation. It's about legacy, power, and the monarchy's very survival. So how did we get here? Let's rewind. This story didn't start with Cookie Queens. It started with cracks, tiny fractures in the royal facade. A brother's quiet frustration. A sister-in-law's growing ambition. An institution struggling to evolve in the age of hashtags and tell-alls. But while the world was distracted by the crown jewels, something was happening behind the scenes. Deals were being signed. Alliances were forming. Narratives were shifting. And now, in 2026, it all comes to a head with a single documentary. One that's supposedly about cookie season, but according to those closest to the palace, it's about so much more. So the question becomes, are Harry and Meghan simply telling an uplifting American story? Or are they baking in a final act of revenge? And perhaps more urgently, will Prince William finally strike back? Because word is, he already has. Let's pause for a moment and look at the official description. According to Deadline, Cookie Queens is billed as a coming-of-age documentary exploring the joys, pressures, and pain points woven into one of America's most cherished rituals. Girl Scout cookie season. On its own, that sounds harmless. Wholesome even. But when you zoom out, when you see who's producing it, how it's being marketed, and what's been said behind the scenes, the tone changes dramatically. Sources close to the production claim the documentary is interlaced with themes of identity, family expectation, and generational trauma. Sound familiar? That's because it's the same emotional blueprint Meghan Markle used in her Oprah interview, Spotify podcast, and Netflix docuseries. The themes may change costumes, but the villain remains the same, the British royal family. And now, Prince Harry is said to be stepping in front of the camera, not as a narrator, but as a participant. That's where things get dangerous. Because while the official line from Archewell is all about uplifting voices, royal aides are warning that the Sussexes are using these so-called platforms to gradually unravel the crown's credibility on the world stage. So ask yourself, if Cookie Queens really is just about cookies, why involve the Duke and Duchess of Sussex at all? Why is the show being filmed in discreet stages, away from media scrutiny? Why are former royal staffers suddenly lawyering up? And why, for the first time in years, is Prince William allegedly pushing for something so drastic that even King Charles hesitated? Here's what we know. Multiple reports from inside Buckingham Palace suggest that urgent, high-level meetings have been taking place since news of the Cookie Queens documentary broke. While the official story remains tightly controlled, insiders say the mood behind closed doors is one of shock, betrayal, and swift retaliation. Not just because of the documentary itself, but because of who it involves and what's been said. You see, this isn't just a content project anymore. It's a weapon. One designed to inflict maximum cultural damage on an institution that can no longer afford to play defense. Royal commentators are calling this a tipping point, and it's not hard to see why. The crown is fragile. Between Prince Andrew's scandals, King Charles's ongoing health concerns, and a public increasingly skeptical of tradition, the monarchy is operating on thin ice. Now add Meghan Markle's latest Hollywood chess move into the mix, a slick, emotionally manipulative docuseries disguised as a feel-good celebration of American girlhood, and you've got a recipe for disaster. Especially when you consider this, titles are now on the line. Yes, you read that right. There is growing pressure. From Parliament, from palace insiders, and even from former royal allies, to strip Meghan and Harry of their royal titles permanently. Not just the working titles. Everything. Why now? Because of what's allegedly revealed in Cookie Queens, and how those revelations could permanently alter the public's perception of the British monarchy. But perhaps the most chilling part of all this? Prince William is said to be personally involved in the response. For years, he's been painted as the calm, restrained future king, the peacemaker, the dignified heir. But that version of William may be gone. Sources close to Kensington Palace say William has reached his limit, and that what Meghan and Harry are attempting with Cookie Queens is the final betrayal. They've aired grievances. They've monetized trauma. They've accused, hinted, and speculated. But this could be seen as espionage. Think about it. How does a royal prince, still bearing the title Duke of Sussex, appear in a documentary that critics say is designed to undermine the very institution that title represents? How do you wear the crown's jewels while trashing the crown itself? And how does the palace remain silent while it all unfolds in 4K on streaming platforms across the globe? Short answer, it doesn't. Not this time. Not anymore. So here's where things get real. There's growing evidence that Cookie Queens contains scenes edited, stylized, and scripted to appear spontaneous, that include subtle jabs at British class systems, royal parenting methods, and coded references to toxic family structures. And while none of it directly names the monarchy, royal insiders are warning it's not the what that matters, it's the how. Because Meghan's brand has always been about plausible deniability. She doesn't need to say the Queen was racist. She just needs to pause, to raise an eyebrow, to let the silence speak volumes. And now, with Cookie Queens, that strategy is being refined into something far more dangerous. A global media machine capable of shifting public opinion with emotional storytelling and strategic ambiguity. And Harry? If reports are to be believed, he's not just supporting this new narrative, he's helping write it. Which brings us to the heart of today's firestorm, William's retaliation. Sources say he's already drafted the paperwork, that legal experts have been consulted, that the move to strip titles could be executed before Cookie Queens even premieres. And more importantly, that he's not doing it alone. This time, King Charles may have finally given his blessing. But before we reveal what Prince William's next move actually is, and how Meghan plans to respond, we need to understand how Cookie Queens evolved from a documentary into a declaration of war. Because buried in the footage, the casting, the press releases, and even the promotional teasers are breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs that lead us to one uncomfortable truth. This was never about cookies. It was about control, about legacy, about who gets to define royalty in the 21st century. And if you think this story ends with a stripped title and a canceled premiere, think again. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Is it really just about cookies? Or is Meghan Markle once again dressing up a calculated power move in sugary sweetness, smiling soundbites, and glossy close-ups? Because let's be honest, Cookie Queens didn't just fall out of the sky. It's not a random, heartwarming story plucked from obscurity. This isn't a passion project about young girls finding their way. No, this is a chess move. A strategic narrative weapon. One designed to look like a hug while delivering a slap. And at the center of it all, Meghan Markle. Executive producer, creative director, image architect, and now, possibly, royal destabilizer. But how did we go from palace corridors to cookie booths? Let's unpack this carefully. Because once you peel back the caramel layers and throw away the pink packaging, what's underneath is anything but sweet. The announcement was subtle. No flashy press conference. No explosive trailer. Just a quiet little article tucked into Deadline, Hollywood's industry insider Bible. The headline? Harmless. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry to executive produce Cookie Queens documentary. Sounds cute, right? But did you read the subhead? A coming-of-age story about the joys, pressures, and pain points woven into one of America's most cherished rituals, Girl Scout cookie season. Pain points? Pressures? Hold on. We're not talking about war zones. We're talking about Samoas and tagalongs. And yet, somehow, Meghan has found a way to turn America's most nostalgic, non-threatening tradition into a therapeutic exploration of trauma and identity. Sound familiar? Because that's the same exact tone Meghan took with every previous media venture post-Megxit. Archetypes Podcast, a platform for dissecting the labels that diminish women, but somehow always loop back to how misunderstood she was. Harry and Meghan Netflix doc, supposedly about love, but it spent more time dissecting royal coldness than celebrating marital joy. The Cut interview, billed as a profile, but turned into a thinly veiled manifesto on the price of silence. So, again, does this sound like a documentary about cookies? Or does it sound like another vehicle for the Sussexes to insert themselves into a narrative while pretending to stand on the sidelines? Now here's where it gets slippery. Because on paper, Cookie Queens has nothing to do with the royal family. There's no direct reference, no obvious connection. But that's exactly the point. This is soft propaganda. Not loud, not accusatory, but quietly corrosive. Drip by drip. Think about it. The themes are coded. Generational expectations. Female empowerment within rigid institutions. Performing perfection in front of powerful families. Those aren't cookie metaphors. Those are palace metaphors, wrapped in frosting. Still think we're reaching? Let's talk about casting. The documentary will follow a group of teenage Girl Scouts across a single cookie season. Innocent enough. But leaked internal notes, yes, those exist, suggest Meghan's team handpicked girls with very specific backgrounds. A child from a biracial family navigating cultural identity issues. A teen whose single mother was once passed over for a corporate leadership role. Another who reportedly feels unseen in her larger, more traditional family. Now ask yourself, who do those stories mirror? This isn't representation. This is reflection. Specifically, reflection of Meghan's own narrative. Her self-styled arc of being the overlooked outsider, the underdog who dared to speak truth in the presence of power. She's not just producing this. She's reliving it. And if that doesn't raise red flags at the palace, it should. Because these aren't just American girls selling cookies. They're stand-ins in a story Meghan has been scripting for years. Now here's where things get even more telling. Why is Harry involved? You'd think, after Spare, he'd take a back seat from content creation for a while. The memoir was scorched earth. Family relationships incinerated. Global headlines. Emotional confessions. Frostbite revelations. He got everything off his chest. Or so we thought. And yet, here he is, listed as co-executive producer, flying to set locations, seen speaking directly with the girls, offering emotional support and guidance, according to insiders. Does that strike you as normal? A British royal prince, still carrying titles, spending time crafting a documentary about cookie sales and adolescent trauma in a country he wasn't raised in? No, it's not about the Girl Scouts. It's about platform. It's about packaging a broader story under the guise of universal values. In Meghan's world, every smiling child is a symbol. Every tearful monologue a metaphor. Every segment a sermon. And with Harry on board, it lends legitimacy, royal proximity, the illusion of authority on systems and suffering. But here's the contradiction. They're painting themselves as survivors of outdated institutions, while cashing in on the prestige and protection of the very institution they claim to have escaped. And people are starting to notice. Not just viewers, not just the British press, but Hollywood itself. Multiple sources have confirmed that several high-level producers initially approached for Cookie Queens declined involvement. Why? Because they saw it for what it was. Not a documentary. A decoy. One insider from a major streaming platform, who chose to remain anonymous, said this. The vibe was off. It felt less like a docuseries and more like a veiled attack. You could tell Meghan had a larger message to deliver. One that wasn't about cookies. That same executive claimed the original pitch deck Meghan presented included storyboards with phrases like, "The crown of girlhood," and "the price to wear it." What happens when legacy demands silence? Selling cookies, but not your soul. Selling cookies, not your soul. Is that really about fundraising? Or is that a passive-aggressive jab at the royal family, where silence is sacred and image is everything? And here's the bitter irony. They're doing exactly what they once accused the firm of doing to them. Curating a narrative, controlling the edit, casting symbols instead of people. Except now they are the institution. They are the power. The gatekeepers, which makes their self-victimization feel less like truth and more like branding. But maybe the most revealing moment came during a behind-the-scenes Instagram live from one of the production assistants. The post was deleted minutes after it went live, but not before it was screen recorded. In it, you can hear Meghan, off camera, giving direction to a girl who had just finished a tearful monologue about feeling ignored in her family. Meghan's words? Say it again, but this time. Imagine your family is watching you, and you finally get to tell them the truth they never let you say. That sentence. Read it again. Is that the kind of prompt you give for an uplifting docuseries about Girl Scouts? Or is that the kind of prompt you give when you're trying to turn a teenage experience into an allegory for your own? A moment later, Harry walks by in the background. He doesn't say anything. He just nods, and the camera cuts. So where does that leave us? A documentary supposedly about cookies. A production team filled with PR veterans, ex-Oprah staffers, and Netflix alumni. A cast of emotionally vulnerable young girls. A prince still holding royal titles. And a duchess who's not just rewriting her own story, but seems determined to rewrite the monarchies, too. But what if we told you that one of the girls on the show didn't follow the script? What if we told you that she recorded something she wasn't supposed to? And what if that clip, leaked to someone close to the palace, sparked the very meeting where Prince William finally said, "Enough"? What came next wasn't just a PR war. It was the beginning of a royal counterstrike. And the whistleblower? She was just 15 years old. She was only 15, bright, ambitious, the kind of girl who always raised her hand first in class. A natural leader. Her troop leader described her as sharp as a tack with a heart of gold. And she had no idea that signing up for Meghan Markle's Cookie Queens documentary would thrust her into the middle of a royal firestorm. No one did. At first, it seemed like a dream. A Netflix production. A real Hollywood crew. A former duchess hovering nearby. Lights, cameras, the buzz of fame. For a teen who'd only ever seen the inside of her school cafeteria and the local YMCA gym, it was surreal. She wasn't just a Girl Scout anymore. She was a star. But the cameras weren't the only things rolling. Because like most kids these days, she recorded everything. Her iPhone? Always on. Snapchat streaks. Voice memos. Group chats filled with updates. And that's how it happened. How a single, unscripted, raw moment behind the scenes exposed a truth no one was supposed to hear. Let's rewind. The crew was filming in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Northern California. Meghan was scheduled to appear for a casual sit-down with 3 of the girls, an informal cookie circle, where they'd talk about identity, motivation, and what it means to find your voice. Sounds innocent, right? But according to our whistleblower, something happened during that segment that didn't sit right with her. It started when the producers began asking the girls to speak from the heart. One girl started talking about how she felt like she didn't fit in with her cousins, how they made fun of her for being too loud, too opinionated, too different. That's when Meghan leaned forward and said something that made the room go still. She whispered, almost conspiratorially, "That's exactly what happened to me. I was told I was too much, too American, too ambitious. And look where I am now." The girl nodded. Meghan smiled. Then she said, "Sometimes, the people who silence you the most are the ones who smile the hardest when the cameras are on." Boom. That line. It struck the whistleblower immediately. It didn't sound like advice. It sounded like a shot, a coded message, a script. The whistleblower, who we'll refer to as Sophie to protect her identity, later told a family friend that the whole thing felt off. Too rehearsed, too personal, too familiar. And that's when she hit record. Sophie's phone caught everything. Meghan talking about being raised in a system that polishes you down until you can't see yourself anymore. A producer suggesting a reshoot because this angle makes it feel more intimate. Harry, stepping in for a moment, offering the girls words of encouragement, but also saying, quote, "It's okay if you feel nervous. The world should hear what you've been through." Again, subtle, but Sophie was paying attention, because she hadn't been through anything that dramatic. She just sold cookies. Why was everyone treating this like trauma therapy? Later that evening, Sophie showed the video to her mom. Just a casual playback. Her mother watched, frowning. She didn't say anything for a long time. And then she asked, "Who told you to say those things about your dad?" Sophie blinked. What things? The playback revealed a heavily edited monologue, where Sophie had spoken vaguely about being misunderstood, dismissed, and undervalued. In context, it sounded like a serious accusation. But in reality, she was just talking about the time her dad forgot to pick her up from band practice. Totally harmless. Embarrassing, even. But the producers had coached her to dig deeper, to frame it like a pattern, and to speak from a place of empowerment. Her mom's expression hardened. That's when the decision was made. They had to pull Sophie from the project. But before they did, her mom made a call. Not to the media, not to lawyers, to an old friend, someone who had once worked for the palace's communications office. Within 24 hours, that video reached someone inside Kensington Palace. And within 48 hours, Prince William was on the phone with his father. Here's where things get intense. The palace had been monitoring the Sussexes' media ventures passively for years. Nothing too aggressive. A quiet strategy of restraint. But Cookie Queens was different. Because it involved minors. Because it used veiled narratives. And because this time, it felt coordinated. William listened to the recording personally. Sources say he played it on repeat. Not because of what Meghan said, but because of how she said it. Controlled. Intentional. Almost performative. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't just another vanity project. This was war by storytelling. And worse, Harry was in on it. William's rage was quiet, contained, but absolute. He reportedly turned to his top advisor and said, "This is manipulation, and it's using my family's name, even if it doesn't say it out loud." He wasn't just worried about Meghan's words. He was worried about the blueprint. Because if Cookie Queen succeeded, if it captivated audiences and drew critical acclaim, what would stop them from making another? And another? Each one inching closer to direct accusations. Each one eroding the monarchy's image a little more. One caramel-coated confession at a time. The question now became, what could William do? He couldn't stop production. The Sussexes were free agents. The Crown no longer had control over their professional ventures. But it did still have something else. Titles, legal status, symbolic recognition. And for the first time, William was prepared to go after them. Inside Kensington, meetings intensified. Lawyers were brought in. Advisors reviewed precedents. Public relations specialists ran simulations. What would happen if Meghan and Harry were officially stripped of their titles? Would it spark global backlash? Would it confirm everything Meghan ever said about feeling othered? Or would it finally draw a line in the sand? Sources say William didn't hesitate. We've tried silence. We've tried dignity. Now we try action. And in the background, Sophie's video continued circulating among trusted palace circles. Her parents, terrified of being caught in a media circus, signed over the rights quietly, under the condition that Sophie's face and name never be revealed. The palace agreed, not because they were scared, but because they knew something bigger was coming. Days later, another video leaked. This one wasn't from a whistleblower. It was from an anonymous source inside the Cookie Queen's editing suite. A single scene, black and white, intimate. Meghan standing in front of a wall covered in post-it notes and vision boards. Her voice, calm but loaded. She says, "This isn't just about cookies. This is about reclaiming the narrative. For every girl who's ever been told to smile and be quiet. For every woman who's been written out of her own story." The clip is only 18 seconds long, but it's enough. Because when it ended, the palace issued a quiet but clear message to its senior staff. Prepare for response. Not just in the media. Not just in private. But publicly. Formally. And when the Crown responds, it doesn't whisper. It roars. But what no one expected, what took even the palace off guard, was what Meghan did next. Because just days before the official statement from Kensington was scheduled to go out, Meghan boarded a private jet. And her destination? Not Los Angeles. Not Montecito. Not Toronto. But Washington, D.C. Why? What meeting was worth risking optics and backlash? And who, exactly, was she going to meet? The answer would send shockwaves through both Hollywood and the palace. Because what Meghan was planning next would make Cookie Queens look like a warm-up. And it would leave Prince William with no choice but to escalate. Dramatically. Because the war wasn't just on screens anymore. It was entering the halls of power. And what came next would make history. Who's really calling the shots? Because here's what we've been told. Cookie Queens is a heartfelt, coming-of-age documentary about the joys and struggles of Girl Scout cookie season. A project about empowerment, resilience, and sisterhood. But if that's the full story, then why are some of the most politically charged, media-savvy strategists in Hollywood gathering behind closed doors to shape it? And more importantly, what do they have to gain? Because if you follow the trail, it doesn't lead to a humble documentary. It leads to a war room. A Hollywood war room with a singular mission. Rebuild Meghan Markle as a global icon by tearing down the institution that made her famous in the first place. Let's break it down. The first red flag? Sunshine Sachs is back. Yes, that's Sunshine Sachs, the PR juggernaut once responsible for damage control for Harvey Weinstein, Michael Jackson, and other infamous A-listers. Officially, Meghan cut ties with them in 2022 to signal a move toward independence. A new chapter, a softer image. But sources inside Los Angeles say otherwise. A contact within one of Hollywood's big three talent agencies confirmed that former Sunshine Sachs consultants were recently spotted attending closed-door meetings with Archwell's production team, now under a different name, using a boutique rebrand. Call it a coincidence, or call it plausible deniability. But either way, it's the same team, the same architects, the same scorched earth media strategists. Only this time, they're not cleaning up after scandal. They're manufacturing a narrative from scratch. Let's go inside one of these meetings. According to an anonymous producer who attended an early strategy session in Beverly Hills, the room was lined with whiteboards covered in two categories: Girl Scout themes, royal archetypes. Yes, royal archetypes. In a documentary about cookies, what were they doing on the wall? Apparently, each cookie narrative was mapped against a symbolic version of Meghan's own experiences. One example: a Girl Scout struggling with group pressure, Meghan feeling silenced by Palisades. Another: a teen confronting a judgmental parent, Meghan's veiled accusations against unnamed royals in the Oprah interview. Even more chilling, one whiteboard reportedly had the word Camilla crossed out, replaced with matriarchal figure. Do you see what's happening here? This isn't a documentary. This is strategic story laundering. They're not saying it outright. They're not naming names. But they're mirroring stories, subtly, carefully, so that Meghan's experience is echoed through every innocent teenage voice on screen. And the goal? To win sympathy, not just from viewers, but from voters. Yes, you read that right. Voters. Because here's where the conspiracy stretches beyond Netflix and into dangerous territory. Meghan isn't just trying to reclaim her image. She's trying to reposition herself as a political player. How do we know? Because according to leaked internal documents, one of the consultants tied to Cookie Queens also worked on a campaign team for a U.S. Senate candidate in 2024. This consultant, whose name we'll withhold for legal reasons, was described in marketing materials as an expert in shaping identity-driven campaigns that blend entertainment and political influence. Identity-driven campaigns. Sound familiar? Now think about this. What better platform to test those tactics than a documentary about teenage girls, ambition, and generational power structures? Especially one that gives Meghan plausible deniability. She's not the subject. She's the guide, the mentor, the benevolent voice in the background. But every voice in the foreground sounds uncannily like hers. And Harry? He's not just tagging along. Sources close to the production say he has his own segment in Cookie Queens. Not as a scout leader, obviously, but as an advocate for emotional wellness in male allies. Sounds noble, until you read the leaked talking points he's allegedly been given. Breaking free from ancestral expectations. Rejecting inherited trauma passed down through titles. Creating new family structures rooted in empathy. Now tell me, does that sound like cookie talk? Or does it sound like another chapter of Spare being played out in high def, wrapped in the glossy visuals of childhood empowerment? But here's the kicker. The production company behind Cookie Queens? It's not just Archwell. It's also a lesser-known entity called Framework Collective, a creative incubator with deep ties to social justice campaigns and media activism. Their website boasts clients who have launched disruption-based initiatives that reframe public discourse. That's code for they make documentaries that start fights. And guess who funds them? A well-known Silicon Valley philanthropist who previously donated to anti-monarchy publications and once publicly stated that the British royal family is an outdated relic with no place in modern democracy. Still think this is just about cookies? Still think this is just a feel-good series for Netflix? Because this web of influence isn't subtle. It's engineered. A perfect storm of Meghan's media acumen, Harry's broken ties to tradition, political strategists looking for their next project, and financiers who see the monarchy as a bloated symbol of privilege. And in the middle of it all, A Girl Scout cookie, used as bait, as a mask, as the frosting on a far more calculated campaign. Here's another detail few have caught. Each girl in Cookie Queens was reportedly asked to write a personal empowerment letter during filming. An exercise meant to foster self-expression. Sounds harmless, right? Until you realize those letters are being compiled for a coffee table book, rumored to be published by Meghan's new Archwell imprint under Penguin Random House. Now ask yourself, is this really about the girls? Or is this about creating intellectual property that solidifies Meghan's brand? Because each one of those letters, coached, stylized, edited, becomes part of a broader narrative that says, I overcame. I found my voice. I broke free. Which, not coincidentally, is Meghan's mantra in nearly every post-royal interview she's ever given. This isn't accidental. This is blueprint storytelling, a psychological reconditioning campaign disguised as a coming-of-age documentary. And while all this was happening, guess who else was quietly circling the project? Netflix's global marketing team. Not their documentary division, not their PR wing, their political crisis specialists. The same people who handled the Crown's backlash from Buckingham Palace. Why are they involved? Because even Netflix knows this project is a powder keg. They're prepping response statements, prepping disclaimers, prepping post-launch social media temperature maps to track backlash. And why? Because they know what we all know. Cookie Queens is not just content. It's a cannon. And when it fires, it won't just echo through Hollywood. It'll shake the foundations of Windsor. So where does this leave the palace? Cornered, outmaneuvered, but not powerless. Because just as Meghan's team was hosting closed-door screenings in Santa Monica, Prince William's staff were doing their own screening in a far colder room under Buckingham's watchful eye. And they weren't just watching the documentary. They were watching who was in the room, which execs were attending, which lobbyists had RSVP'd, which political PAC representatives were there without being on the list. And what they saw confirmed every suspicion. Because this wasn't a media event. It was a soft power summit. An invitation-only glimpse into Meghan Markle's next evolution, from Duchess to documentary darling to potential political disruptor. And it left William with no doubt. If this documentary is allowed to go live, untouched, unchallenged, and unaddressed, the institution itself may never recover. Which means one thing. The gloves are coming off. And not just behind palace walls. The response will be loud. It will be public. It will be decisive. But what William doesn't yet know, what none of them know, is that Meghan has one more ace up her sleeve. Because as all eyes turned to Cookie Queens, she was already working on her next project. And this time, it wouldn't just shake the royal family. It would expose their deepest fear, one they've buried for decades. And Harry? He was about to take it one step further, by naming names. He watched the trailer alone. No staff, no advisors, just Prince William in a dimly lit room, headphones on, eyes locked to the screen. At first, it seemed innocent enough. A cheerful song, slow-motion footage of girls handing out cookies, smiling faces, empowerment, laughter. Then came the shift. Dark tones, voiceovers about silenced voices, girls describing how they felt trapped in systems that never listened. One girl talking about being expected to smile even when everything inside me hurt. It was subtle, carefully edited. Not once did it mention the words royal family or monarchy. But William didn't need subtitles. He recognized the language. He recognized the fingerprints. And the moment the final words flashed on the screen, it's not just about cookies. It's about control. He ripped the headphones off, slammed them onto the table, and whispered 2 words. That's it. It wasn't anger. Not in the explosive, table-punching, shouting kind of way. It was colder than that. It was resolve. Because for years, William had played by the rules. Silent dignity. Firm tradition. No comment, statements that protected everyone, even those twisting the knife behind the scenes. But now they'd gone too far. Let's rewind to the day the trailer dropped. The Sussexes had timed it perfectly. A slow news cycle. No other major celebrity headlines. The media was hungry, and Meghan fed them the appetizer of the year. Cookie Queens was trending on Twitter in under 2 hours. Within 4, clips had flooded TikTok. By sundown, morning shows were teasing interviews, and opinion columns were already drawing connections between the documentary's themes and Meghan's own royal survivor arc. But the real spark? A 27-second clip where one of the girls, teary-eyed, says, "They told me to smile, to wave, to never question anything. But I wasn't born to play quiet." Cue dramatic music. Cut to Meghan nodding in the background, her face somber. No one needed to guess who they were. The implication was obvious. And that's what made it so dangerous. Because it was cloaked in innocence. Not a direct accusation. Not a lawsuit. Not a tell-all. Just a child. Speaking lines given to her by adults who wanted the world to make a connection, without ever saying it aloud. That's what enraged William most. Not the documentary. The manipulation. He didn't call Harry. That ship had sailed. There was a time, early on, when William would have tried. Would have reached out, tried to understand. Maybe even protect his younger brother from himself. But those days were gone. This wasn't about sibling rivalry anymore. This was about legacy. And William had just seen enough evidence to know. If he didn't act now, there might not be anything left to protect. Behind the scenes at Kensington Palace, the energy shifted overnight. For months, the strategy had been silence. Control the narrative by ignoring the noise. Rise above. Let the tabloids eat themselves alive while the crown remained untouchable. But now the crown was bleeding. And worse. Young people were buying the narrative that it was outdated, elitist, oppressive. A symbol of everything wrong with inherited privilege. And Meghan? She wasn't just feeding that narrative, she was branding it. Selling it. Packaging it into digestible 30-minute segments with cinematic drone shots and high-emotion voiceovers. Cookie Queens was a direct threat. So William called a meeting. But not just any meeting. This wasn't a group of press aides and advisors. This was War Council. Attending. 2 former intelligence liaisons who'd previously worked counter-propaganda ops during international disinformation campaigns. The palace's top legal counsel. A specialist in royal precedent. And his father's most trusted PR strategist, seconded from Clarence House under royal directive. Their mission? Determine whether Meghan and Harry's actions, via Cookie Queens, constituted a legitimate case for stripping their titles. And the answer? Yes. Let's be clear, stripping royal titles isn't simple. It's not like revoking a driver's license. It requires legal coordination, constitutional analysis, and most critically, political support. Because titles aren't just family ornaments. They're legal structures tied to land, to status, to diplomacy. Revoking them sends a message. A massive one. And until now, the palace had feared that message would backfire. That it would make Meghan and Harry look like martyrs. But William had a different view. He didn't see this as retaliation. He saw it as containment. If the monarchy didn't draw a red line here, if it allowed its own titles to be used as leverage in cultural warfare, then what did the crown even stand for? So he looked around the table and said, "We've protected them long enough. Now we protect the institution." Meanwhile, Meghan was already working her next move. While William was preparing formal documents to present to Parliament, Meghan's camp was sending out teaser invites to an exclusive Cookie Queens screening in New York. Guests, A-list actresses known for anti-monarchy activism, political campaign donors, influencers tied to female-led tech startups, and at least 2 representatives from international human rights organizations. On the surface, it looked like just another documentary launch. But dig deeper, it was a recruiting ground, a press trap. Because if the palace struck first, revoking titles while Meghan was surrounded by advocates, journalists, and sympathetic ears, it would make her look like a victim. Again, that's how tight the game had become. Every move a calculation. Every smile a message. Every cookie sold a signal flare. Back at Kensington, William wasn't naive. He knew Meghan's team would try to spin it, that the media would erupt, that social feeds would explode with hashtags like #LetMeghanSpeak and #CookiesNotCrowns. But he didn't care. This wasn't about social media. It was about sovereignty. So he made the call to his father. King Charles had, until then, remained cautious, reserved, still holding on to hope for reconciliation. But after watching the same trailer, alone in his study, he reportedly turned to Camilla and said, "It's her or the monarchy." William's right. And in those words, a decades-long storm finally found its thunder. Because for all the drama, all the rumors, all the palace whispers, This was the line, and the line had just been crossed. Now came the next challenge: timing. If William moved too soon, it would look vindictive. If he waited too long, Cookie Queens would air, dominate headlines, and make any royal response seem reactive. So they devised a plan. Step 1. Leak the title-stripping conversation. Just enough to stir speculation. Let the public debate it before the decision is even announced. Shift the Overton window. Step 2. Coordinate with Parliament. While royal titles are under the Crown's domain, removing them entirely requires soft political buy-in. Quiet discussions were held with key MPs. The tone? National dignity. Step 3. Prep the legacy media. Major outlets like The Times, The Telegraph, and BBC Newsnight were briefed, off the record, on what was coming. Articles began appearing. Should titles be earned? The Sussex question: where's the line? The narrative was seeded. Step 4. Target the sponsors. Meghan's docuseries was partly funded by philanthropic grants. Royal advisors contacted major donors and subtly reminded them, "You're funding a media attack on the monarchy." One major funder quietly pulled out days later. The machine was moving, but before it could reach its final step, a twist emerged. Something no one expected. A letter. An old, handwritten letter, tucked away in one of the Queen's personal archives. And what it said would flip the entire situation on its head. Because in the final months of her life, Queen Elizabeth II had written a private note. A note addressed to Prince William. Sealed. Stored. Only to be opened in the event that the legacy of the Crown faces betrayal from within. That's the phrase she used. Betrayal from within. And William was now holding that sealed envelope in his hands. Inside, the Queen's own views on titles, on tradition, on what it truly meant to protect the Crown. And once William read it, everything changed. The timeline accelerated. The tone shifted. Because if even the Queen had seen this coming, then this wasn't just William's fight anymore. It was hers too. And she'd passed the torch. The next morning, palace officials delivered a statement to the press. His Majesty King Charles III, in consultation with senior members of the royal family, is reviewing matters related to the usage and inheritance of certain honorary titles. No further comment at this time. The code was clear. The process had begun. And in Montecito, Meghan's camp panicked. They hadn't expected it to move this fast. Not before the full release. Not before the press tour. Not before the emotional interviews were locked. But it was happening. And now? Now it was too late to stop it. Too late to pivot. Too late to control the fallout. Because this wasn't just a PR skirmish anymore. It was a royal reckoning. And it was only just beginning. Because the next move wasn't coming from William. It was coming from a vault deep within Windsor Castle, where a royal archivist had just discovered a second envelope, addressed to King Charles. And inside was a sentence that would make even Meghan's most loyal allies stop in their tracks. A sentence that simply read, "Remove the crown from those who dishonor its purpose." What came next would shock even the most seasoned royal observers. What does it take to strip a duke and duchess of their royal titles? A scandal? A crime? Or something far more complicated, like betrayal wrapped in smiles, camera crews, and boxes of cookies? Because while the world debated the cultural impact of Meghan and Harry's Cookie Queens documentary, inside the royal gates, something far more consequential was happening. A decision was being made, and not just by any advisor, not just by King Charles, but by the full machinery of the monarchy, a council of legacy, law, and loyalty. Behind closed doors, in rooms thick with centuries of tradition, the titles of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex were being weighed, not as names, but as symbols. And what they represented now, after Spare, after Netflix, after the Spotify deal, and now Cookie Queens, was no longer honor. It was danger. Let's start with the legal complexities. The public might think the monarchy can wave a wand and revoke titles at will. It's not that simple. Under British law, hereditary peerages like Duke of Sussex are a gift from the monarch, but they're reinforced by tradition, statute, and precedent. The last time a royal title was stripped under similar scrutiny? The Duke of Windsor, Edward VIII, the king who abdicated for Wallis Simpson. After his abdication, he was given the title Duke of Windsor, but the Queen refused to grant his wife the title of Her Royal Highness. It was brutal, cold, strategic. Now, decades later, A similar decision hovered in the air. Except this time, it wasn't an abdicated king under the microscope. It was his great-great-nephew and his Hollywood-born wife. The meetings began quietly. A select group of royal legal scholars were summoned to Clarence House under the pretext of title evaluation. But the wording was telling. Not review. Not assessment. Evaluation. The implication? A value had been lost. A cost had been incurred. And now, restitution was being discussed. Sources say the earliest meetings included representatives from the following: the Lord Chamberlain's office, royal legal advisors who specialize in peerage law, private secretaries from both Kensington and Buckingham Palace, and at least one parliamentary liaison, there to assess any downstream political effects. The agenda? 3 scenarios. Retain titles, but publicly censure the Sussexes. Risk, seen as weak. Encourages further media exploitation. Remove HRH styles, but keep Duke/Duchess titles. Risk, minimal. Symbolic. Already partially in effect since 2020. Fully revoke Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Risk, unprecedented in modern times. Politically explosive. Reward, final severance. Clear line in the sand. Guess which option William backed? Number 3. No more tiptoeing. No more gray zones. A clean cut. The Queen's secret letter only solidified the path forward. Her words, "Remove the crown from those who dishonor its purpose," were like scripture to those in the room. It was no longer just about protocol. It was about prophecy. And for a monarchy built on symbols and continuity, a posthumous blessing from the longest reigning monarch in British history carried immense weight. So the wheels turned, and a timeline was set. If Cookie Queens aired in its current form, with Harry and Meghan featured, royalty referenced even indirectly, and the institution undermined through symbolic storytelling, the titles would be stripped. No delays, no negotiations, no exceptions. But then, a wild card emerged. Prime Minister James Wilton, a staunch monarchist in public, but a pragmatist behind the curtain. He was briefed on the decision in a secure call with King Charles and Prince William. His response? Mixed. On one hand, he supported the monarchy's autonomy. On the other, he warned, "You may be handing them a martyrdom arc. Be careful. This isn't 1936. His concern? That the international press, especially in America, would spin it as cruelty, vindictiveness, punishment for speaking out. Charles agreed at first, but William didn't flinch. So be it. Let them play victim. We're done being played as fools. And it wasn't just emotion. It was data. Royal staff had compiled detailed impact reports from Meghan and Harry's media activity. Post-Oprah interview, 14% drop in UK Royal Trust Index. Post-Netflix docuseries, 21% increase in anti-monarchy sentiment among Gen Z. Post-Spare, record low support for Prince Harry in the UK at 22% approval. After Cookie Queen's teaser. An immediate spike in social media engagement mocking the monarchy, with several viral clips repurposing lines from the trailer as digs at royal traditions. These weren't just personal betrayals. They were branding attacks. And no institution survives when its image is allowed to rot in the court of public opinion. So the decision was made. The titles would go. And they would go before the documentary aired. The strategy? Strike first. Catch the Sussexes off guard. Control the headlines. Frame the narrative. And the masterstroke? Use Harry's own contradictions as justification. The legal document drafted by royal counsel cited passages from Spare, in which Harry renounced his royal role, criticized the very system that granted his titles, and accused it of being built on silence and suppression. The palace response. His own words confirm his distance from the responsibilities of his title. This is not a punishment. It is an alignment. Let that sink in. They weren't framing it as retribution. They were framing it as respecting his wishes. Harry wanted to be free? Done. Harry didn't believe in hierarchy? Resolved. Harry wanted autonomy? Delivered. But autonomy comes at a price. And that price was Sussex. Behind the scenes, Meghan's team scrambled. The leak had reached them within hours. At first, they didn't believe it. After all, they were still legally Duke and Duchess. They still had invitations addressed to those titles. The ink on their latest press kits hadn't even dried. But once they confirmed it, panic. Because Cookie Queens, the documentary designed to cement Meghan's narrative, was about to debut in a world where her royal titles no longer existed. And without those titles, she wasn't the Duchess of Sussex. She was just Meghan Markle. Still famous, still influential, but different. Because despite the protestations, the titles mattered. They opened doors. They sold books. They fueled Netflix deals. They silenced critics. Without them, the narrative shifted. Suddenly, Meghan wasn't the rebel within. She was just the outsider looking in. And Harry? His transformation was worse. From duke to defector, from prince to poster boy for resentment. The optics were brutal. But just as William prepared to deliver the final decree, just as legal papers were being finalized, press embargoes set, headlines primed, something unexpected happened. A call from Los Angeles, not from Meghan, but from an executive producer at Netflix. Not panicked, not angry, curious. Is this really happening? Yes, said the Palisade. And when does the removal take effect? Within the week. There was a long pause, and then the voice on the line said, "We may need to revisit the cut of the final episode." Boom. Just like that, the dominoes began to fall. Because while the Sussexes may have seen the monarchy as obsolete, Netflix still saw it as valuable. And without those titles, the documentary's crown jewel, its most marketable thread, was unraveling. Because a story about Meghan Markle is powerful, but a story about the Duchess of Sussex? That's media gold. And without it, the trailer suddenly lacked teeth. The sound bites felt flatter. The whole from castle to cookies arc? Gone. But Meghan wasn't going to go down without a fight. She issued a statement through a close friend of the family to People magazine. Titles are labels. What matters is truth. And truth cannot be stripped. Clever. Defiant. But internally, sources say she was furious. Not at William. At Netflix. Because if they chose to backtrack, if they chose to neuter the documentary out of fear of backlash, then all of this, all of it, would have been for nothing. No titles, no sympathy, and now, possibly, no platform. Meanwhile, William stood at his office window in Kensington Palace, watching the autumn leaves swirl in the gardens below. He held the finalized documents in his hand. No tremble, no hesitation, just a steady resolve that echoed through generations. He thought of his children, George, Charlotte, Louis. What legacy would he pass down to them if he allowed the crown to be used like a soapbox? If royalty could be reduced to a marketing tool? This wasn't just about Meghan and Harry anymore. It was about what the monarchy stood for. And so, with one signature, he set history in motion. The titles would be removed. Publicly, legally, permanently. But as the ink dried, a Palisade rushed in. Not breathless, but urgent. "Sir, we have a situation." What kind of situation? Meghan's just been spotted boarding a plane to Washington, D.C. William didn't blink. What for? We don't know yet. But she's not alone. Who's with her? The aide hesitated. An attorney. And Samantha Markle. A silence fell. And then, for the first time in days, William smiled. Because whatever Meghan thought she was about to do in D.C., whatever ace she believed she held, it wouldn't stop what was already in motion. It would only expose more. And Samantha? Her presence meant one thing. The surrogate scandal was coming back. And this time, with documents, with names, with sworn testimony, which meant that Meghan's fight wasn't just about cookie queens anymore. It was about everything. And what came next would be the most brutal phase yet. She saw it coming. Long before Meghan ever stepped into Kensington Palace. Long before the Oprah interview. Long before Harry ever uttered a word of spare. Queen Elizabeth II, stoic, measured, always 10 steps ahead, left behind something no one expected. A letter, not addressed to the world, not to the public, but to one person, Prince William. And its contents? Not just a grandmother's guidance, not just a monarch's musings, but a chilling prophecy. A warning about betrayal from within the royal family, one that would eerily mirror the chaos erupting now. And it had been hidden in the royal archives ever since her death. Until now. Let's go back. The Queen was a woman of immense discipline. She rarely spoke out. She never gave interviews. Her public image was one of poise, control, and silence. But privately, she kept meticulous records. Letters, journals, notes, marginalia on briefings and photographs. The royal archives are filled with her quiet reflections, sealed away from public view. Only a handful of people are ever allowed access to these records. The Lord Chamberlain, the private secretary to the sovereign, and the direct heir, Prince William. So when the title-stripping crisis escalated and William began preparing for constitutional war, one royal aide made a fateful decision. They unlocked the Queen's private collection, not to find comfort, but to find precedent. And what they discovered stunned them. At first, the archivist thought it was just another formal note. The handwriting was familiar. Blue ink, slight slant, understated royal crest embossed in the corner. But the salutation stopped them cold. To William, when the day comes. Not dear William. Not to my grandson. To William, when the day comes. It was dated January 5th, 2020. The day after Harry and Meghan's were stepping back as senior members of the royal family, Instagram bombshell. The very moment the monarchy began to unravel in public. But clearly, it hadn't been a shock to her. She had anticipated this moment. The letter was 6 pages long. It was not emotional. It was strategic, tactical, and in it, she outlined 3 core warnings, each one now coming eerily true. Warning number 1. Charm is currency. Beware those who spend it like water. In this passage, the Queen reflected on Meghan's rise. She didn't name her directly. She referred to her as the new American influence. She wrote, "I've seen many come through these gates with smiles and camera flashes. They dazzle the people. They dazzle the press. But the ones who spend all their charm too fast often leave the fastest." That line hit hard, because it perfectly described Meghan's entrance into the royal family. Instant charisma, global press, a whirlwind wedding, and then, just as quickly, tension, friction, and eventual flight. But the Queen didn't stop there. She added, "A person too focused on being seen rarely sees the bigger picture. They may mistake their popularity for permanence. It never is. Chilling, prescient, and deeply relevant now, especially as Meghan attempts to rebuild herself through Cookie Queens." Warning number 2. When family becomes narrative, monarchy becomes theater. This section is perhaps the most damning. The Queen lamented the growing reality TV culture surrounding the royal family. She noted how the press no longer simply reported scandals. They created character arcs. And she warned William, "If members of this family choose to turn our legacy into personal content, we must act, not with spite, but with stewardship." She anticipated that someone from within would eventually cross that line. And again, she didn't name Harry or Meghan, but she described a scenario that matches exactly what we've seen. A royal turning their experiences into memoirs. A royal leveraging emotional trauma for documentaries. A royal framing themselves as the truth teller against an ancient system. She continued, "Let no one wear the crown while dragging it through the mud. Titles are not shields for sabotage." That single line, it hit William like a jolt. Because it wasn't just a metaphor. It was a blueprint for action, and it provided the moral authority he needed. He wasn't stripping titles out of vengeance. He was executing the Queen's will. Warning number 3. The future king must protect the throne, even from the blood that shares it. This was the final and most painful part. The Queen acknowledged that family ties would complicate William's decisions. She mentioned how difficult it was for her to watch her own uncle, Edward VIII, be exiled from the crown. But she added, "My father's burden became his legacy. He did not choose it. It was thrust upon him by betrayal. You may face a similar choice. Choose duty, not affection." That sentence was like cold steel in William's chest. Because if there was one thing he'd always held on to, even in the wake of Harry's book, the Netflix series, the public mudslinging, it was affection. He didn't say it aloud, but the pain was always there. That was his brother, his childhood partner in crime, the boy who followed him everywhere. And now, the man who'd followed his wife into battle against the crown. This letter forced William to let go of the sentimentality. This wasn't about brotherhood anymore. It was about preservation. And the Queen made it clear. "You are not just my grandson. You are the bridge between what was and what will be. Do not let it collapse under the weight of sentiment." The letter was placed into a secure leather binder marked Legacy Protocol, Emergency Only. William carried it with him to every meeting that week. He didn't quote it publicly. He didn't share it with press. But in private discussions with King Charles, Parliament liaisons, and royal advisors, he referenced it again and again. It was his North Star. And when skeptics pushed back, Suggesting that removing Meghan and Harry's titles would be too much, William responded with this. The Queen saw this coming. She prepared for it. If I ignore her wisdom now, I don't deserve the throne. That shut the room down. Every time. Meanwhile, Meghan's camp scrambled. Someone close to the palace leaked knowledge of the letter's existence to the Telegraph. The phrasing in the leak was subtle, but cutting. Sources confirmed the late Queen left written guidance for her grandson William, should any royal family member attempt to monetize the monarchy from outside its walls. It spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, headlines read, "The Queen tried to warn us." Elizabeth II left a royal roadmap, and Meghan was on it. Legacy versus influence. The battle the Queen predicted. Suddenly, Cookie Queens was being re-evaluated, not as an inspiring docuseries, but as the final straw the Queen had long feared. But then came the twist. As William and Charles prepared to make the title-stripping announcement official, another letter surfaced. This one was addressed not to William.